Hello. I have to admit, this presentation was both challenging and fun to make, and I hope you get some benefit out of it. The Catholic Church has long held that there is no salvation outside of the Church, but it's also a topic that I've had to address with many Protestants who contend that the Catholic Church has admitted error by changing the meaning of the doctrine, no salvation outside the Church. So to help you respond to your Protestant friends who may question you, or to convince you of this teaching yourselves, we will take a look at what does it mean to be outside the church, why is the church necessary, we'll look at a few council teachings, and what is this thing called invincible ignorance, which Protestants think is the gotcha evidence for error. Well, it's not, and we'll explore why and give you the confidence to make this the non-issue that it is. So, if there is no salvation outside the church, then it must be necessary. So let's answer why that is. We learned a few videos back that Jesus and his church are inseparable. We also know by Acts 4:12 that no one is saved outside of Jesus. So, if Jesus and his church are inseparable, it only follows that if no one is saved outside of Jesus, then no one is saved outside of the church. Pretty basic logic. The Bible also tells us that faith, baptism, and eating Jesus' flesh and drinking his blood are all necessary to attain eternal life. And Jesus built his church to administer these sacraments of grace. Now, Jesus could have chosen any number of ways to help us along our salvation journey, but chose to utilize his church. For this reason, again, the Catholic Church is necessary. So now that we know the Catholic Church is necessary, what does it mean to be outside the church? You might think that that's an easy question to answer, as simply those who are not faithful Catholics. But it's actually not as straightforward as it might appear. For instance, the very early church believed that if catechumens, those who were preparing to become Catholic, died before being baptized, well, then they were included as a member of the church. St. Cyprian and Augustine in the 3rd and 4th centuries were just two of the many church fathers who believed this. The church has also always approved valid baptisms from other denominations. Both of these examples are those who are technically outside the church, yet considered implicitly a part of the church. So we see that outside the church is a little more nuanced than what it may first appear. And then, what about those who, of no fault of their own, without willful intent or adequate understanding that the church is necessary, what if they reject the church? Are they outside the church? Here is where we explore the church's teachings on what is called invincible ignorance. The simple definition of a person being invincibly ignorant is for that person to not know the truth of no fault of their own. In essence, they are not culpable for their actions, in this case, the rejection of the Catholic Church. Now, this teaching is supported by the Bible in James 4:17 as a person needing to know the right thing and not do it for it to be a sin. And then in Acts 17:30, where God overlooked the ignorance of those of earlier times. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas supported this belief by stating that if the cause of the act is due to ignorance, it is then an involuntary act and is excused from sin. And the Second Vatican Council formalized this belief as stated in paragraph 1260 in the Catholic Catechism as those who are truly or invincibly ignorant of the truth can still be saved if they are seeking truth and doing the will of God according to their understanding. Sounds pretty reasonable, so why is the teaching of invincible ignorance such a big deal to some Protestants? Well, it's because they feel it contradicts the teaching of the Council of Florence in the 15th century, where that conference taught that all who are outside of the Catholic Church, and they named pagans, Jews, heretics, and schismatics, will not share in eternal life unless they are joined to the Catholic Church before they die. But no mention of invincible ignorance. So does this mean that it's a Catholic invention? To answer, we need to understand the context in which Florence was teaching. When the council points out pagans who believed in multiple gods and that Christians were cannibals because of their belief in the Eucharist, Jews who denied the divinity of Christ, the heretics who opposed the church's teachings, and schismatics who attempted to divide the church, they were addressing those who knowingly and publicly rejected and opposed the Catholic Church. Therefore, the decree of no salvation outside the church was addressed to those who were willfully and knowingly sinning, those who are culpable. In contrast, 500 years later at the Second Vatican Council, where invincible ignorance was taught, they were focused on those who didn't know. Paragraph 846 in the Catholic Catechism utilizes teaching that came from this council. It states that the church is necessary for salvation, so no change. But it also stated that only those who knowingly reject the church could not be saved. This is where we get the teaching of invincible ignorance, where if a person was truly unaware or invincibly ignorant that the Catholic Church was the one true church and not willfully rejecting, then salvation was possible. This subtle change, Protestants claim, is proof of a change in the meaning of the doctrine, no salvation outside the church. But there is no contradiction at all. Both state that the church is necessary for salvation. And while the Council of Florence was focused on those that knew and rejected the truth, the Second Vatican Council was focused on those who were not willful in their dissent. Same teaching, just coming at it from different contexts and audiences. So why didn't the Council of Florence add an invincibly ignorant clause? It's because that's not who they were addressing. It's really as simple as that. As always, since Jesus built and protects his church, the Catholic Church, you can rest assured that the church has not, does not, and will never teach error. There is no salvation outside the church. And yet if a person is truly invincibly ignorant about the Catholic Church being necessary for salvation, then they have the possibility of being saved. However, being invincibly ignorant and truly not having an opportunity to understand is a high bar to prove. And people can fool themselves into thinking that they had no opportunity when they actually did. So that is why we must evangelize those not in full communion with his one true church. Now, I hope you found this video helpful on this very important and difficult topic. In my next video, I'm going to discuss Protestantism's second fatal flaw, and it's absolutely disqualifying in my opinion. And until that time, may God bless you on your faith journey.